All right, welcome everyone. Zach Arskiden joining you from the studio here at Christian Center of Shreveport. Going to talk to you today about obviously the issue of the Strait of Hormuz with Iran, the impacts on not only the U.S. oil and gas prices, but also the worldwide dilemma that is being drawn out from this, and the importance of this week, the week of the decision for the Trump administration on how to handle the Iran political balance as we see things coming to a head both here nationally and internationally. And then we want to lay out here at the end a major prophetic word of significance for the rest of this year that plays out from Chuck Pierce. So continue to join with us and stay along with us as we talk about the news today here on the Pipeline Report. All right. Thank you guys for joining with us today as we're going ahead and getting started. I'm going to go ahead and bring Pastor Tim in here as he's made his way back from Ireland. And let's have some fun here. And let's bring him back in here. He seems to be jumping in and out for whatever reason. And there we go. Good to roll here. Today we want to talk about obviously the Iran issue, but then dive into the effects here and talk about a little bit of here domestically and internationally, because I think one thing that is not being talked about is, okay, yeah, America is having some effects on its gas prices, and Trump's somewhat pushed back on that a little bit, talking about how, look, they're not as high as they were during the Obama administration, so the Biden administration, excuse me. But let's welcome back Pastor Tim as he's made his way back from Ireland here. And again, got some toys here from Eric.
All right. Can you hear me?
Even know about. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. My mic seems to be acting out today. So glad to be back with you. And we do have some important topics to talk about. Obviously, the war in Iran and beyond, the spirit of Persia, or the Prince of Persia, being at battle here. And we'll share a word I put on my podcast today, because we're in a 7-day period, which will end 21 days of war with Iran. So I'm going to pull that up here in a minute. But we want to share what Chuck Pierce had about it. Me and him were conversing while I was in Ireland, and we were both getting basically the same revelation about what's going on there. So we want to make sure that
Seems to have lost his mic there for a second. If you didn't hear him, if you haven't heard his podcast this morning, I think it's very revelatory, and he breaks down the prophetic word that he has, and then also the conversation that he's been having with Chuck. And if you listen to our service yesterday, and you listen to Glory Zion's service yesterday, you would have heard something very similar. One, because they're talking, but two, because we're tracking together with what's happening in the world. I think it's really important that we understand the real issue at play here, where we're seeing that we're in this season of I'll take you out of here for a second. Let me know if you come back with sound here. We're in this season that, and Chuck laid it out very clearly yesterday. Let me know if you hear me as I'm coming through here. And we're in the season of transition. And in this season of transition, we can see at times that people look for some clarity and some focus, in looking for people who have the truth and who are looking for answers. And what we're finding is, and we're seeing, is that people are obviously looking towards the news, and some people are looking towards the Lord. But there's a lot of confusion and being brought about in the earth right now as we're in this big season of transition. And I'll bring it back here. It looks like
I think I got it working now.
There we go.
Okay. Sorry. We were sharing, as Zach was saying here, Chuck Pierce's word and mine. We were conversing last week in Ireland. back and forth because I had a revelation I saw in a vision. I recorded it, I think, for Thursday's podcast last week. But in this vision, I saw this huge serpent. I mean, mouth was wide open, and I knew it was the Prince of Persia, a principality. And I broke down on my podcast what's the difference between powers and principalities. And this was a principality. This was huge. And in its mouth, it was releasing chaos, number one, but disbelief. And it was releasing a false narrative about the war, and that this was going to be an endless war, that Iran was holding its place, and that the regime there was not even being shaken. This is what I saw in this vision, and I kept hearing the voices, and I saw it just spewing it out across the media air and other places, and people were beginning to believe it. So after I had the vision, I woke up like it was like 3 a.m. I literally was awakened with this vision. It was wide open. I was awake, saw everything. So I texted some friends, and anyway, that message got to Chuck, and he then added it to what he was giving, and we started corresponding together about that. So, and what it was doing, and then later that morning I turned on the news in Europe, which is horrible, by the way. Bless their hearts. They have no choices in their media. They have to listen to the left, and that's all they have. That's all that's aired there. BBC, places like that. They don't have any conservative news whatsoever on their airways. They have to go find it somewhere else, and then they're probably monitored for doing that. But nonetheless, and that was the very narrative that they were coming out with. Even some Democratic, they only interview Democratic congressmen and senators. They don't interview any Republicans whatsoever. So you have to hear that narrative. And one of the things they were saying is that this was a stupid war. It's not going well. The IRGC is doing fine. They're staying in power. The very thing I saw in my vision. Matter of fact, one Democratic congressman, I don't remember who he was, said, Khomeini was going to die anyway of cancer. All we had to do is wait on this. And I'm thinking, well, what about the 40,000 people who were waiting for it and they died? I mean, the narrative was so ridiculous of what he was giving, but that's what Europe has to listen to every day, day in and day out. So that's why you get this coalition against what America's trying to do. The media is the propaganda. Back in the communist day, we called the Pravda, which was the voice of Russia, the communist Russia. And that is really what's going on here now. And so I saw this whole thing come. And then, Chuck, you want me to share that now, Zach?
Let's go in first to
Okay.
the big update that Trump just put out
Sure.
on the Strait of Hormuz and the interesting aspects that there are countries now, because this is key. We talked about it a little last week of and I'll pull it up, about how we know there's an issue with the Strait of Hormuz with the Iran war. That's where things boil down to. What Trump and people are putting out is and the administration is putting out is Iran has small weapons that are able to affect ships, and you have a lot of oil companies and a lot of nations kind of pulling back here. You're also seeing, let me see if I can find it here. There are reports that the UAE has stopped producing oil in its refineries that could possibly be helpful. But then you also have some drone attacks here in Dubai. I'll play this, where you're seeing the smokestack here in Dubai from an oil refinery that could help relieve a lot of the issues that are at play here. But what we're also seeing, and this is not really being reported about, there is this, I'll show this here. It's an op-ed from the Wall Street Journal. It's an opinion piece where ultimately China has a lot to lose in this U.S.-Israel-Iran war, because they have upwards of, it's believed, 70 to 90% of their oil supply comes from Iran and comes from the Strait of Hormuz. So they have this, and this is here from Twitter, where the oil price has shot up over $100 for China, where it was down below $60, which is very, very dramatic for China. And I'm trying to see, I'm going to find, I had it pulled up here in regards to China and the oil issue, is the fact that there were massive lines where of people trying to get oil, because they have an issue where they're for days going and trying to, or for hours, trying to get in line to get oil. So what does that mean? What does that mean for Let me go back. Let me find this.
Let me say this while he's looking for that. When I was in Ireland, I watched the fuel prices while we were there. When I got there on the euro dollar, they
Here we
sell in
are.
liters, so it's like 3.7 liters to a gallon. There was like a dollar 117 a liter, and
So you're seeing, yeah, here
go ahead.
you're seeing these massive lines. This is
Yes,
China. This has been verified by Grok on Twitter. This is just one video that's gotten out. Obviously, in China, they have major censorship, and people in China are franticking. They're freaking out, and because they have very limited supply of oil. And you've also seen the administration here in the United States relieve sanctions on Russia. So now Russia's being benefited for the next 30 days. I believe it's somewhere in April where the sanctions are relieved on all these oil tankers that have this Russian oil that's out there that could possibly relieve the market. And that's ultimately what's going to go. And so there's a long-term play here. Okay, how does this affect? Because what Iran's doing is they're sending drones toward, and they've talked about blowing things up majorly in regards to um, basically if the U.S. attacks our oil refineries, we'll go and attack your allies and your oil refineries. So there's a major possibility that can play. Also, the question is Iran just a paper tiger? Do they really have these capabilities that are out there? I know you were going to talk about the price of oil and gas in Europe there, where you're seeing it.
yeah, and that was something that's interesting. I As we were praying, we had a dream on our trip about Iran, and that term they were throwing this paper at us, and I heard the word paper tiger. And a paper tiger is somebody that on paper looks like they're powerful, but they're not. And I think that's what we're going to find out ultimately. But this false narrative that I saw in that open vision is trying to dispel that truth. So that's where the spiritual war is going on. It's actually a war of words. And this is a year, the decade, I should say, of words. We know that. And that's why this battle is so real. As I was saying, the fuel prices, I think they were 117 a liter when I started, which is about, that's in the euro, that's probably around 175, 185 dollars, US dollars. But anyway, when I was leaving, it was almost up to $2 a liter. It had jumped up 70 cents almost a euro, which for us would be paying $5, $6, $7 a gallon is what you'd be paying there. And the people were just panicking. Also, their fuel for oil in their houses. So it's a little bit different there. They don't have natural gas running their houses and stuff. They have actually fuel tanks that each homeowner has to buy their own oil, heating oil, different types of oil they have to buy, and that price went through the roof because of that. So the Europeans are panicking as a whole because it's affecting their pocketbook. So now it's Trump's fault. It's America's fault. It's Israel's fault. So this is where the spiritual battle. Remember, Jesus said, "You'll have two battles: either serve me or serve mammon." So you're going to always have the mammon issue, the mammon God versus the kingdom God, the Lord God who we serve. So this is the battle that's going on. So it is raging. And let me go ahead and share this. I shared on my podcast, but this is Chuck's word, which is Chuck Pierce's word, because in our conversation, he basically, and I had already gotten it. I shared on my podcast about 21 days, and Chuck shared with me personally that he said that's where we are right now. He felt it was a now word, the 21 days, which will end. I think this Saturday is the 7th. I think it started on 28th of February. So I counted down 21 days will be this coming Saturday. But he gave this word, and I think he put it on his post, so you can go find it. But anyway, many are asking about the war in Iran because of the government's treatment of the Iranian citizens. And the Lord told me, this is what God told him back in November 3rd, 2024, that Iran had an opportunity to repent and change, but they didn't, and they would get blasted. And that is what has happened. But in the days ahead, Iran will have revival. And the Lord gave him Jeremiah 49:36-39. He says, comes a time when you don't over pray about certain world issues, Many times the will of God and for those nations is already revealed in his word. Therefore, you have to just agree with the word of God. When two or more touch what they agree with, the will of heaven, it will be done on earth. We prayed today that anyone who tries to take the lead office of Iran, and it is not the Lord's choosing, it will also be dethroned. I know we must have compassion and love for the Iranian people as the Lord brings them to the forefront of his kingdom plan at this time. Okay, that's the first part of his word. Let me add to this, because when I gave the battle axe word a couple weeks ago, of Jeremiah 51, that the Lord was going to release his battle axe to pull down a leader, which he did. He pulled down the Ayatollah. The Lord did, obviously used humans to do it, but he did pull them down. That word came to pass. So there was no need for me to praise anything else. Don't over pray, like you said. And so I asked all of you, many that listen to us, just agree with the word of the Lord that the battle axe should be released. And then the Lord showed me in that vision that I saw the battle axe, that we would be battle axes as well as intercessors. We would partner with the Lord to do that. And that's exactly what happened. We came into agreement with the word of the Lord. It happened that way. Now, when Christians start saying we shouldn't be involved in this war, et cetera, that's not what the scripture's saying. And that's not what the Lord's telling us. And like he said there, we have to agree with what is in the word of God that's already there. And that's what we're doing. I'll stand on that one. Take the hits for, agreeing with the word of God and war. I had this before in the first Iraq war. I was taken in the spirit. I was taken to Iraq, and I had an Iraqi walk up to me and says, please pray that America drops bombs on Iraq. We need judgment. And I ran that by many prophets. We did it. We prayed, and that's what happened. And then an encounter, a revival broke out in Iraq, and it did, because Saddam Hussein was no longer oppressing the church. It began to have an encounter with the Lord. So we saw that. So as we're moving, you want to add anything to that before I go to the rest of his
Yeah,
word?
I mean, think of this is like, wouldn't we want to go back? And we talked about this earlier. Wouldn't we going to go back to, say, World War II, before World War II, when Chamberlain had the capability of preventing Hitler from going in and invading Poland? And yet, here we sit here and we Monday morning quarterback and say, oh, he should have done this and should have done that. Here's Trump doing something like this because we were on the cusp. And I know we talked about it last week majorly with Carolyn Glick, who is an right-hand advisor for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and talking about and understanding what the negotiations actually were, and saying directly, this is firsthand knowledge of somebody involved in the negotiation, saying the Iranians were basically bragging about their capability of building ballistic missiles upwards of 1,000 per month. Thinking of a school bus size missile rocket coming at you Mach 8, which is really fast. If you understand that, it's upwards over 1,000 miles an hour, where it's just bombarding, and Israel couldn't deal with that. Europe couldn't deal with that. United States couldn't deal with that. So something had to be done, because if they were able to do that and get their facilities back up and running, then they're on the fast track even faster to being able to produce nuclear weapons. And then if they have the capability of launching ballistic missiles, they just add nuclear capabilities to that. Then you're talking about being under the thumb of oppression. That's very, very hard, I think, for Americans to comprehend. And I think the big thing is there's a lot of confusion being put around, especially in the media space, both from the right and the left, saying President Trump needs to do this, President Trump needs to do that, he needs to come out and say this, he needs to come out and say that, as far as why he invaded Iran, why we're doing Iran. It's like, look, this is very simple. I mean, if you understand what's actually going on, I think this is more on the people who are listening. It's like, are you listening to what's actually being said? I mean, this man, there's a CNN reporter comes out and talks about whenever there's a camera around Trump, he makes it a press conference. So it's to the point of, look, what else can Trump do other than come into each individual American's home and tell them what's going on? That's ridiculous.
And I can't put it. I couldn't put it any better than what he just said there. And this is very important for us to stay the course. And for us here at Pipeline and all those that please share that. Stay the course. Don't move off that line, regardless of the narrative that the enemy's trying to release right now and put hopelessness in the land. There's more coming, but that's what I'm seeing right now. But Chuck went on to say back in November 15, 2024, he was with some leaders there, and he says, we are headed into a new season, and our only hope is to align fully with the covenant of God as God gave Israel, and to stand firm in that covenant and watch the blessings in this season of intensity. He said the next 10 months, which would have put it into 2025, obviously, he said, I am calling Mordecai's and my Esther's to arise, for I am saying to Hadassah, which is the number 5 word, he says, I will call you in and you will face your enemy. And I say to the Hamans, which Ayatollah would have been a type of, that's not what he said. I'm adding that. He says, you will be exposed, and over the next 10 months, my eye will be full on those who are battling for freedom of my land. And I say to Iran today, in the next 10 months, get ready. I will send wind after wind to you to change you, and I will give you an opportunity to be changed. And if you will not change, I will come down on you. And if you do not repent, I will cause you to suffer. But I say to you, as Jeremiah 50 says, that my heart is to restore you. I say, turn now, shift your government, and realign yourself now. In the next 10 months, will be very difficult for you. For I'm going to give supernatural grace to my nation, Israel, to rise up and change the course of the world. And that is where we are. The very thing that Zach opened up with about the Strait of Hormuz and all the different things that are going on, the oil prices, the lines in China. We are in a season of war. One thing I did hear when I was in Europe about UK, and we'll get into them a little bit, is it is a season of war, and the season of peace is over in the earth as far as countries not building their governments, their militaries, etc. So I want to add that to it.
I think what's interesting is we're seeing this is, okay, you have the governments of the world doing something, but Trump put out there, and this is being put out, is from, wrong one, mine, where you can see here, Trump, this is Trump's word, or something he wrote last night on Truth Social, where he said he's hopeful that China, France, Japan, South Korea, and the UK and others that are affected by the artificial constraint out of the Strait of Hormuz can protect ships that are going through there. And so what he's doing here, and to say, well, why would Trump do that? Why didn't the U.S. military just do it on their own, et cetera, et cetera? Why would he rely upon somebody? Is he's giving them a chance, these leaders of these countries, a chance to say, hey, if you're going to sit here and worry, complain, whatever the case may be, super dependent upon this oil, then let's do something about it. And the reason he's going to China is because he's saying, look, this affects you 70 to 90%. And Rondi put in here on Rumble talking about Venezuela. The reason it was super important to take out Venezuela first is because China, again, depended upon Venezuela as kind of their backup. But what's interesting about all this that's kind of being left out is the fact that Europe and the EU have a major dependency upon Russian oil right now, and have been for quite some time. And Trump's warned them, hey, you need to get a different supply, and here's an opportunity that America right now is in the process of filling. And so, okay, it may hurt us in the short term, but in the long term, they're gonna see opening up wells and spigots here in America that are going to be majorly beneficial to not only everyday Americans, but to businesses and oil refineries and things here. But and this is something Chuck's also been talking about for well over a year, is the need for us to beef up security around, especially in the Houston area and other areas in New Orleans and along the Gulf Coast, where there are oil refineries that we need to beef up our security on. And so that's an area for us to continue to prey on. Obviously, I think the Trump administration is on the ball on that and understanding and shutting down the border. But the reality is look, he's not trying to go at this alone and trying to be this world power and police the world on its own. He's saying, look, we have to do this together because this would affect the entire world, not just Israel, as a lot of social media proponents are saying, which is kind of sad to see, because these people have a call to be watchmen on the wall. They're going to be judged. And it's one of those things where, look, if they're sitting out here crying wolf and there is no wolf, hey, the wolf's actually on the other side, not where you're looking, then they're losing their credibility, and people are losing their focus. And to the point of this chaos, is we're in this season of chaos because we're in this season of transition. And so what you're seeing is these proponents is and this kind of all ties together if you follow me here. As the media has lost its credibility, people are looking for credibility somewhere else, and they're looking to voices who were on the mainstream media who they thought brought credibility, but in reality who aren't bringing credibility, and they're just bringing confusion in this moment. But it's a moment for us to, as we're in this season of transition, to rely upon the Lord. And in a verse kind of to tie all this together is in Second Chronicles. We're reading through that right now. And if you remember back in 2 Chronicles 20, where it talks about how Jehoshaphat was making his way back to Jerusalem, and then what it talks about is he tearing down some of the places, but ultimately the high places were not destroyed. And he talks about the people had not yet directed their hearts to the God of their fathers. And if you remember when Samuel it was looking, for a king, and God told Samuel, it's not because of what you've done, it's because the people have ultimately rejected me. And so I think for not only America, this is a kind of a heart check here, conviction, but also for the Iranian people of looking forward, and more so, we were talking about this before, this is the Persian people, because you have a lot of different demographics there, especially the Kurds, who are making some moves to get into power there. And I don't know enough, and I don't think America knows enough, as far from what I'm understanding and seeing and reading of what actually the dynamics are there within those people in the Middle East. And maybe we can go down this road. We talked about this before going live, look, we're in these situations because of the League of Nations after World War I of dividing the Middle East up. And so this is one of those things where there's actually somebody who talked about this, is Trump's taking a lesson from the playbook of Nixon of, look, let's have strength here, but let's not put our arm too deep here in the Middle East, because this is one of those things where these countries are going to have to battle themselves out. And if you look at the freedom track of Eastern European countries who came out from under the USSR's thumb, it ultimately had to end up being the people in the country who rose up, who took land back little by little, and ultimately overthrew the dictatorships that were there, overtook the corruption that was there in the land, and were able to gain freedom and become the countries they are today. And the question is, and I think something that is not really being discussed about, is should Iran stay in its current state form, or should it be broken up? And you could look at all the Middle East like this to a degree, but the reality is does Trump want to get involved? And I think some of the Americans pushing back and saying we don't need to be involved in a forever war, I think they're right to a degree. But the reality is look, something had to be done, and now here's where things play out. But if we're following this 21-day timeline, it's okay. Trump said this. He's like, look, I'm giving you an opportunity. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You got to seize it. And I think this is where the Persian people and even the Kurds and everybody else in the land, and if you didn't listen last Friday to Jacob's breakdown of the religions there in Persia, or what is now Iran, there's a dynamic there that they are going to have to deal with, whether it be an old mystic religion or turning to Christ or going further into Islam. They have major decisions there ahead of them.
And let's not forget this, that, of course, there's four or five different groups of Kurds around the Middle East. I was talking to a friend who lives in the Middle East last week or week before, and he was sharing to me all their differences. And let's not forget that Iran was once a Persian people, but it's been invaded by radical Islamic Arabs begin to come in, and that's where a lot of their ideology is coming from. It's not really their foundation, but it has come in there, and for 47 years it's been ruling, and so this is a seasoned in. And the Strait of Hormuz which is the big battle, because that's where most of the fuel goes through. 20% of the world's fuel goes through, and here was a discussion yesterday from some experts, even from one of Trump's administration issues. And now Trump said, I was listening to a press conference he just gave a few minutes ago. He's asking for NATO help, et cetera. And he said, because you never know if it's a pun or he's just throwing stuff out there, he wanted to see, if he asked for that help, who would actually help and who would not. So he's trying to kind of find out who's on his side and who's not on his side. So far, Germany said they don't say they'll be involved. Australia, Japan, Spain, others, there's no need for us to be involved. So this is where you're starting to get a place where even UK which now they're sending, while I was there, they sent a ship out. But this was very serious. And Senator Kennedy said some things about Starmer yesterday that you need to listen to. I'll play a clip of it here in a minute. But here's some discussion on the Strait of Hormuz and how important it was, or how important it is to what's going on here. Let me play that clip here, and it'll help you understand a little bit more.
Is what Energy Secretary Chris Wright had to say.
I think that this conflict will certainly come to the end in the next few weeks. Could be sooner than that, but the conflict will come to the end in the next few weeks, and we'll see a rebound in supplies and a pushing down of prices after that.
Tony, what do you think? How long do you think this will last?
So again, as Blaine said, it's not a supply issue. There's a glut of global oil. The issue is the perception of what's going on. And at this point, yeah, militarily, as I said last week, we're pretty much done with the set of targets that we'd set out to do. But there's the two problems that are left are, first off, asymmetric war. While we've planned against this region for years, and again, this is Blaine's point, not mine. I want to give him credit. The technology of war has changed. Drones have been introduced to the battlefield at a scope that we never really fully understood. So that's why Iran can
All right, can you hear me now?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, I lost this mic, but as we see right now, what's going on there is this attack on the Hormuz Strait by different types of entities. That it's very important that we get this through, and as we protect it, it's going to change the whole world. I think that's very critical. The timeline is very important. I was listening to an Israeli leader this morning. And one of the things he said, it's very important that the Americans do not put a timeline out there, because when you put a timeline out there and say, okay, we're going to be done in a week or 2 weeks, the enemy says, okay, all we have to do is survive the 2 weeks. He said, you must keep talking about objectives. We're not quitting until objectives are accomplished, because in that place, then the enemy knows they're not stopping until they finish the job. So let's keep praying that they will not fall to the trap of giving timelines. Who's demanding timelines? The media. Who's demanding timelines? People are that want to know, when's this thing going to be over? We want to know all this. It's very important that the administration keeps saying until these objectives are accomplished. I think it's very important.
And that brings us to the issue here domestically of how Trump got into this. Because when you were gone, talked about it a little bit, and Ben Shapiro talked about it at length, and a lot of media have, of how he used this. And ultimately, once he started, he had 60 days to basically come justify himself before Congress. Then the question is okay, once that ends, can he then find another way to figure out to extend it or just re-up it? So that's where prayers and strategy has to come in for this administration of how to handle this. And one thing that I think was reported, I forget who reported it, but somebody did. The Susie Wiles lady, basically who's his right hand, organizing and administering everything, came out that she had a report of early onset breast cancer. So there's something to pray for as well as she goes through this battle, that she's able to, and the administration is able to stay on top of everything, because she's really been one of the biggest kind of key focal points there, a key man there in the insurance world, where she's been able to kind of help Trump stay focused. And she said her focus before the administration started, after winning the re-election campaign, was basically keep the crazies away from Trump, because that's where he gets distracted, because he gets enticed by that. And so now she's being pulled at for whatever reasons, naturally, spiritually. So if she's having to go out, who's going to fill her place? And so you see the layered prayers here, where we need to continue to pray for them through this.
So this is, I think we learned in the first administration of just because they're good people doesn't mean they're the right people to be around him. And I think that's something that we need to understand. And she called it the circus or the clown show of his first administration, of people around him. And we know who they are. I'm not going to name them. We all celebrated these people because they were good people, but they were not ready to give worldwide diplomacy and give answers to problems. They came up with ideas, but they were not sometimes constitutional. They were not wise, and so forth. And that really was part of the reason President Trump lost the next election. And that's the reality of it all. And so now he has competent people and a lot of Christians, a lot of strong believers, Rubio and others that are speaking into his life, which I think is very important. Now, Bassett was on yesterday and shared kind of breaking some of these narratives down. I think it was very important that he do this because you need to understand that there are things going on that you cannot believe. He's on CNBC. Here's his statement.
Well, we know exactly who we are fighting against. And if you want to use kind of historical analogy, think they're in Hitler's bunker, but Hitler's dead. And now they have dispersed out. And one of the things I'm going to do is bust this myth that is in the mainstream media that there is this coherent Iranian plan, that they are a smoothly functioning government. First of all, the previous Ayatollah did not want his son to become the Ayatollah. He left written instructions and they overrode him. We believe that the current Ayatollah is injured. We don't know to what extent, and maybe incapacitated. And they're just small bases. They're in the bunker. They are panicked, and like the circular firing that they are doing on their Gulf neighbors was a big mistake.
But it's enough. But it's enough to distort probably the most important shipping point in the world. And I don't want
Okay.
Well, we know
So he makes some good points here, and that goes back to what I was seeing, that vision I saw of the serpent of speaking these words and chaos and lying to the people. So that's why I put validity on what he said. Okay, I understand he could just be given a narrative of the administration, but the fact is, I have prophetic that, and not just me, others have too, but that's what is going on here. They are not coherent, and that is true. It's been proven that was what the former Ayatollah said. Even today, it came out that possibly he's a homosexual. We know he struggles in a lot of areas emotionally as a man. So they said Trump laughed at that when they told him that. But nonetheless, he's not the one that needs to be running the country. And Chuck's word was, unless the right leaders put in place, they're going to keep going down. So this is very important. We agree with what God is saying and not agree with our minds or what men are saying. We have to agree with what the Lord's saying in this situation. And it is not there's no way you can be bombarded by hundreds and hundreds of bombs every day and say you're coherent and you're not affected by it. The infrastructure of their military is being dismantled. So they're like a animal with no teeth. They're a tiger with no teeth. So there's nothing to bite with anymore. I mean, yes, they're still sending missiles and rockets to Israel and the Middle East, but it's getting less and less. You remember, every rocket they send is one less they have, and they can't replace right now for the most part because they're under bombardment. I saw one video of some IRGC meeting at a place, and they got hit by a drone while there was about 100 of them standing there. This is when you look at some of the videos of them, they're constantly looking up in the sky because they have this fear that they're going to be knocked out, and they are being knocked out. That's the reality on the ground. When you listen to the media, that's not what's happening. That they're thriving, they're surviving. And like he said, I want to remove this false narrative. It is a false narrative. That's not what's going on here. And we need to be wise to that.
Yeah, and the big point here, I think, for us to remind ourselves of is look at how the world is reacting now, and if this continues to go on, how as gas prices increase, what are they gonna do? Like, are they going to continue to bash Trump when Trump's giving them an opportunity now to say, hey, look, we need to get it out now. He knows, he understands this. And there's this narrative out there that, oh, Trump doesn't know what he's doing. He didn't know. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But I think the Venezuela move proves that he understood that this was a possibility of the Strait of Hormuz. And I think we're going to start seeing more oil come out of Venezuela, which will be beneficial to them and their people and their nation, to help revive them. And so what you're seeing this as we're in the season of transition, this layer of and blanket of freedom just being put out there, not only for the Iranian and the Persian people, but for Venezuelans, even here in America, and now the possibility of things going off in Cuba. where their prime minister's offices are being bombarded. The IRGC's offices are being bombarded within Tehran. So you're seeing this blanket of freedom being put out over the world. And I know we've talked about it here before, is this possibility of the world being enticed into World War III. But then you have these moments of, okay, the people who need the freedom are rising up, and they're going to have to take it. The U.S. can't continue to just be everywhere all the time. They're not all knowing, they're not omniscient, omnipresent. It's going to have to be the people who are there and rely upon the Holy Spirit, who is omnipresent there, to be with them and guide them through this. Because at the end of the day, they're going to have to be able to stand up on their own. And if they can't stand up on their own, this is Trump's point, is just like, look, then can they even attain freedom? Can they withhold it? Can they maintain it here and now and in the future?
I think the world's catching up with the prophetic, which is a decade of war. And when I was in Europe, I did watch some of the news, and that's one thing they're saying. Europeans are like, well, I guess the season of peace is over. We better start ramping up our military. And so Germany's doing it. UK made an announcement that they were going to increase their gross domestic product, increase to build the military. Well, it was exciting news. It was like, okay, finally, I think they have 150,000 military. We got 2.8 or 2 point something million in America. So it's a big difference. And this is what happened to them in the World War II. Their military had downsized after World War I, and they were not ready for the attack, and they had to ramp it up, and they're trying to do it again. Well, Senator Kennedy did the research on Starmer's statement that they're going to increase their military. This is hilarious, as Senator Kennedy always is. And here's some of the things that he said about. There's a little fun clip at the beginning here. I'll just kind of highlight it.
Any United Kingdom Air Force bases or military bases. None. Zero. Nada. He specifically said you can't use Diego Garcia. Now he says you can use our bases. Thank you very much. It's a little late. We don't need you. He also is trying to give President Trump advice about how to conduct the war. Sir Keir Starmer is the last person you would want to go to. If I'm wrong, I hope the Prime Minister will respond. But if I'm right, shame on him. I want to talk about our friends in the United Kingdom.
So let me, you need to watch this clip. I'll put the link up. You can watch it. It's a great speech. I'll tell you what, I put it on Pipeline too. But it's a great speech. He has his humor in there too. But here's the point. He found out in his investigation that Starmer said, okay, we're going to increase up to 3% or something like that, or GDP for military. And he said it's all backloaded. In other words, he said in the next 3 years, we're going to do this. He said the money for the rebuild will not happen until the 2030s. So it was just smoke and mirrors to get people off his back, that he's going to build up the military. He won't even, and Senator Kennedy said it, he won't even be in office when supposedly this kicks in. So this is where the deception of these leaders are just playing political games out there and not actually building what they need to build right now. And I think that's something that we need to be aware of and pray accordingly. And for the Brits and all the UK, because in Northern Ireland, where we're there, that's part of the UK, they're all just absolutely frustrated with their government on that issue, because it's becoming very apparent they're not ready for war. They're not ready for battle, and it may come to their shores as well. At least some of their entities, as already said. And he says this about their Diego Garcia. If you don't know, that's an island in the Indian Ocean, and the United Nations and everybody said you need to give that back to Mauritius. Well, who is Mauritius? Mauritius is China's Chinese ally. Absolute. They're married together. So if they give up that island, which is the closest place for us to fly in and out of and do a lot of the stuff we're doing, then China gets the island. And now the Middle East has a threat from China in the very place that they've had allies and support protection. So this is huge. It's like a big chessboard going on right now. But the fact is that we cannot listen to the false narrative. We must pray according to what God's given us right now.
And let's remember kind of the focus that we're talking about here is as we lean into the rest of this year, we have the midterms. And we heard last year from the Trump administration And I put it out there. We put it out there as like they're saying, look, this is going to be the year of the economic boom playing out, and this is kind of a hindrance to that. But the reality is if things go as the way I just described of, okay, the Strait of Hormuz gets cut off, maybe you get some ships and countries in there to help, but then it opens up wells and gas things here in America, Venezuela, et cetera. You're talking about a boom and a very major benefit for many people to alleviate the inflation from since COVID, really, but they did even years before that. If you can get gas back down to closer to $1, under $1, you're talking about a major benefit from this fallout here. But then also it's, again, as I talked about, this layer and blanket of freedom that's being put out in the world that I think after Trump's gone, you can say, okay, this is a reality. But then there is also the reality of, okay, we had the midterms here. Trump said these things last week. They were saying, and even the transportation secretary was talking about, okay, it may take a little longer than what they said last week of it only lasting a week. Okay, they have to start bringing some credibility. They're pushing things back. This, I think, to the point of this timeline thing, they need to be very careful and saying, look, if we can get this objective done, then we can see shortly that we can turn this around. But they kind of hampered themselves last week and tied themselves up by saying, oh, this is only going to last a week. I think that was a little bit premature, to say the least. And so the reality is now we're watching this. This is what the administration said now, and they're saying, okay, now we need to deal with this. And I think this week is the week of that they're focusing on this, and something has to break here. And I think the time now, there's reports of draining down the strategic petroleum reserve. And the question is, okay, are you going to refill it right now while prices are high? Well, that's going to hurt Americans now and be very harmful to them. Are we going to then open up leases and start drilling so that we can lower the price and then refill it, which they should have done Trump's first term and they refused to do, but that's a separate issue.
And we better get ready for possible economic downcline. Now, first of all, God's economy never goes down. So we put our trust in the Lord. Do not pull back on your giving. Don't pull back on trusting the Lord and all that God's called you to do. Fear is not a portion of what we're called to walk in right now. We're called to walk in faith. So I think this is something that will happen. And it's very important because we're in the midterms. And that's why a lot of analysts felt that Trump should not go into this battle right in the middle of midterms. But think about what's going to happen if this works out the way the Lord plans it. Iran will fall. The regime will fall. We'll have a chance for peace in the Middle East. Economic boom everywhere. And it actually could be the very push you need for the midterms to move forward. So this is why we got to keep pressing in, not believe the false narrative that's going on out there in the media. So I'll turn it over to Zach and he'll close it out. So thanks for listening to us today. God bless you.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. And again, we've gone through a lot today. So thank you for hanging in there for everybody who's on. And the reality is we're here, and we talked about it this year, talking about focusing on the midterms and praying. And the reality is praying for the people. Praying for the people to hear through this, to see through this, as everybody's navigating and trying to figure out where to find their information. You have obviously older generations who love the mainstream news media, and they have their cable, they stick with it, and that's where they go. Younger crowds find and go elsewhere, and that's becoming a problem. On the right, it's being called the podcast wars. And so we're seeing these things play out right before our very eyes, on the right, on the left, and everybody in between. And the reality is look, there's only one place to really seek and find for a true guidance during this season of transition, which brings about chaos, which brings about confusion. And the only way through this is by having our ears attuned to the voice and the words of the Lord. Is do we have an ear to hear? And John talked about that is gaining the importance of gaining an ear to hear, to be able to discern through what is being said, both in the natural and the spirit realm. And God will give clearly dreams, visions, and encounters to us if we'll attune our ear to this. And this goes to not just everyday people, but also our leaders, as they're being bombarded with information and news to all the world situations and their constituents who are being somewhat hit right now with the increased gas prices. And so if this can be something that is dealt with and dealt with expediently, not only within the Strait of Hormuz, but also exposing some of these lies that are being put out there. I've seen reports saying, the administration saying this, and then Trump comes out and says, nope, that's not happening, and then it ends that. And you stop seeing that storyline being followed because Trump puts an end to it. And so these are distractions, things that wear him out. I think Trump's the one president that we could say could handle it, being as sharp as he is, even in his older age. And the reality is we have to continue to press in, pray, even for ourselves. And this moment of transition here in the world is where we're going to navigate and put our faith and put our hope in. And we're challenged right now, and everybody, as we grow. And when I was younger, I struggled through transitions, and now I think I'm getting a little better. Obviously, I know I have more ways to go than one, and I'll admit that. And so I'm having to die to my flesh and seek the Lord through guidance through this. And ultimately, if I know I'm going through this, I know a lot of you are, and even our administration and our president and those who are there, as they're the ones who have more information as we're kind of on the outside trying to navigate through this. And so we want to continue to pray on that point, standing on the wall for this nation and for the people to hear God's voice through this season as we get closer to the midterms, and allowing this blanket of freedom to continue to be pushed, not only here in America, but also around the world. And it's not just for peace sake, but it's more for an understanding of, as this blanket of freedom is continue to be pushed, you have the capability and possibility now of the gospel of the kingdom to come in right behind it and to help people deal with anxieties, depressions, as we're seeing a rise in this within not only the country but the world as well, from the fallout of all these things that have taken place. So again, thank you all for joining with us today on today's Pipeline Report. We'll be back tomorrow with our noon prayer with John, Karen, and Lori, and then Wednesday night as well. And we'll be back here on the Pipeline Report next Monday. So blessings, and I'll see you guys next week. Have a good one.